Welcome to Ahval. Today we have with us forensic medicine specialist Dr. Şebnem Korur Fincancı, who is also the chair of the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey and is one of Turkey's most prominent human rights defenders. Welcome, Dr. Fincancı, and thank you for being here with us today.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to interview with you. I hope we will have an efficient interview.
I hope so too, and it's our pleasure having you with us. So to begin with, Turkey has had a reputation for throwing people into prison on a whim for a very long time. We have many journalists, politicians, activists, people who work in the legal department who have been imprisoned. Have recent global events, meaning COVID-19, changed the current situation and status of prisoners? If so, which ones?
So, of course, it is a very interesting situation now with the COVID-19 infection and the pandemics, also in Turkey. And we have concerns about the prisons, indeed, because it's overcrowded now, it's over the capacity. They say that the capacity is around 200,000, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And now there are nearly, or maybe more than 300,000 prisoners now in the prisons. So with this overcrowded situation, everybody calls to the government to have an amendment and to release the prisoners immediately in order to prevent the infection just going throughout the prison. But unfortunately, they declared an amendment yesterday night, and it was a very interesting one because there was a discrimination of the prisoners, and particularly the political prisoners will be excluded from the immediate release. And actually, before their declaration of the amendments, on Sunday, 29th of March, there was a new decree published in the official Gazette of Turkey. And this decree is totally related with the penitentiary system of Turkey. And just omitting the last one who have been used broadly. And in that decree, there was already the former steps of this new amendment regarding the prisoners to be released.
Mm-hmm.
There are particularly the prisoners of terrorist act, even if they are elder or have serious health problems, will not be just benefit from the early release from the prisons. So they already had a decree published in the official Gazette before they declared the amendments of the law, which means that the political prisoners will be excluded from this release from the prisons. Of course, it's very dangerous because this means a kind of revenge for the opponents of the government. While we consider the political prisoners in the prison who have been tried, sued against for terrorist acts, many of these people have nothing to do with the terrorism actually, but they are criticals of the government, journalists, as you have mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
lawyers, and several high qualified professionals who have criticized the government, who have been opposing to the steps taken by the government. and also the politicians, of course. And just recently, during this pandemics in Turkey, they have already forced the mayors to step down from the municipalities, and they were replaced by the governors of the cities or the towns. So they still continue to discriminate all the politicians who have been just opposing the government.
Right. So having full control.
Yeah, you cannot be an opponent of the government. You can't criticize. Even just recently, some ordinary people who have criticized about the collecting funds, which was announced by the president, have been detained, and also someone who have announced on Twitter that not the virus, but this system will kill us, was immediately arrested by the police and taken to the custody and released afterwards, but with some control system.
So who is being released then? How do they plan to manage the overcrowdedness of prison?
They just will release the ordinary criminals, but child abuse offenders, sexual violence offenders, and the drug dealers will be excluded, together with the people who have been just convicted for terrorist acts. This means that people, in the first step, of course, elder people and also people who have serious health issues will be released, which means around 90,000 people will be released from the prisons. Of course, this will diminish the population of the prisons, which is better for the time being, but it is never enough because the political prisoners cannot be excluded from this amendment. It is impossible. It's a discrimination of the people who criticize the government.
Yes, but as you know, according to what you said, sex offenders are free to roam.
No, they will be excluded from, they will not be released.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I couldn't
No.
explain
No.
myself properly. Yes, sexual offenders, sexual violence,
And
child
drug
abuse, and drug dealers will be excluded in this.
So
they will be in the prison.
Okay, so the eligibility of who gets to stay and who has to stay and who gets to leave is determined by age and health?
Yes, of course, this will be the main issue according to the amendment. So prisoners who are over 65 and with serious health problems will be immediately released according to this amendment. Of course, we are not sure because then this will be discussed in the parliament and how everything will go on, but it takes a long time for these people because every day just there is the risk for people who are in the prisons to be infected, because particularly the people who work in the prisons, daily go out and communicate with other people and bring back the infection into the prisons. The Ministry of Justice had an administrative document telling that the wardens and people who work in the prisons will not go to their houses and will not leave the prisons. But this is also a human rights violation. And also, it is a long time to work in the prisons. Working conditions would not be healthy, as well as for the people who work there. Not only for the prisoners, but for the people who work in the prisons will have their rights to be violated in this kind of administrative steps.
Right, and yes, they are also, in a sense, living in prison instead of home in this manner. Can you earlier this like recently you published a report on Mustafa Koçak. He was accused of violating the constitution and was on a hunger strike for a fair trial. And eventually his weight was in critical condition. Can you tell us a little bit more about his condition and why it needs attention?
Of course, it is a kind of breach of ethics to talk about a person who have applied for an evaluation of the situation, but I understand that his lawyers also shared the information and the report, the document that I have elaborated. So I don't think, and I don't hope, I hope it wouldn't be an ethical breach to share the situation. Unfortunately, there are some limitations to reach the documents in the prison health system, but our colleagues from the Izmir branch of Human Rights Foundation of Turkey tried to collect all the documents regarding his health, and lawyers helped, of course. So we have some information, for example, about his weight loss, and also according to the family members' information, we know about his height, so that I just calculated the body mass index. It is a very important issue with the hunger strikers, particularly after the thiamine B1 vitamin consumed throughout the hunger strikes. Before thiamine consuming hunger strikes, it was a very dangerous situation when we had the body mass index under 15. But now, with the thiamine consuming system, then we observe people just to have their functions regulated, but the one I have last followed up was Nuriye Gülmen and Semih Özakça, and their body mass index was around 12. While it was very dangerous, the situation was very dangerous and life-threatening in that period of their hunger strike. And when we calculate Mustafa Koçak's body mass index, it's 11.02. So it is too low now, which means that this is a life-threatening situation. And also the problem is to follow up his, particularly the blood tests. And unfortunately, he was forced to just hospitalized, and afterwards they had forcibly had blood tests of him and forcibly fed him in this prison hospital. It is a serious breach of ethics, of course, and also he had very high level of anxiety during this forced feeding, and they had to tie him on the bed. So we could see some marks on the body which are consistent with tying on the bed, and there are some injuries. They're related with the ropes that they have tied him on the bed. So this kind of behavior, we can say that amounts to torture, because he refused to be fed, and also being forcibly fed is a kind of torture, while he refuses and several times pulls out the serum. So it was also a problem with his health condition, because when you force someone to feed and to tie this person, then this is a traumatic event, particularly on the psychological condition of him. So his health was affected not only by physical force, but psychological effect is important, which means that his immune system would be affected, because the psychological violence also has effects on the immune system of a person. So they endangered his life while they just claim that they try to make him live. This is not a reasonable way of dealing with the hunger strikes. Instead of forcing this person for feeding, they have to just negotiate and try to accept what they demand. And it's a very reasonable request from the government and from the legal authorities. He only asks for fair trial. So this is a very humanitarian request in this sense, and we really need a fair trial system in Turkey for hundreds of thousands of prisoners.
So in the end, what's happening to him? Is he getting his fair trial? Or
we do not know. Of course, the lawyers had taken the case to the Constitutional Court, and hopefully the Constitutional Court will evaluate and consider the situation, review the file, and have a judgment for this person.
okay, and
But it is not for only him, of course.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
It is not for only Mustafa Koçak, of course.
Of course,
it
yes.
is for many, many people in the prisons. There are other hunger strikers. For example, lawyers are on hunger strike, and they are asking for fair trial as well.
Normally, I mean, I was going to ask about torture in prisons, but also the living conditions in prisons. Speaking of hunger strike, how do people eat in prison?
The food is actually organized mostly by the health service systems of the prisons.
Okay.
But unfortunately, many of these people, particularly the physicians who work in the prisons, are not experienced in this sense. So it is not very easy for them to organize the feeding of the prisoners. In some prisons, there are dietitians which might be helpful to organize the system and the kitchen, but it is not very easy. And also we know that the food served in the prisons is not sufficient and totally healthy. There is limited sources, And this limited sources means that fresh vegetables and fresh fruit is not served properly. So prisoners usually have to buy them themselves from the canteens of the prisons. And it is not very easy because many of the prisoners cannot afford to buy such kind of food. And in many of the canteens, they do not sell this kind of food sufficiently. So this is a problem. Of course, the other one for the prisons is the hygienic sanitary problems, because in many of the prisons, we hear that they do not have running water throughout the day. Sometimes it is once a day for a limited hours, 1-2 hours. Sometimes it is once a week in some prisons. So these are the allegations, of course, because we don't have means to observe them as human rights activists. Government never allows us to observe the situation in the prisons. We apply to enter and to observe the situation, but always refused by the government,
right,
while they claim that they already serve any kind of needs for the prisoners. But the allegations are from the lawyers, sometimes the family members of the prisoners, and they write us and ask us to follow this situation. So it is a serious problem, particularly in this pandemic situation. They need water. The main protection is through water and soap. And also, soap is not very easily handled in the prisons because the prisoners have to buy their soap. And what if they cannot afford to buy the soap? I know that there is a immense solidarity in the prisons, particularly regarding the political prisoners. And sometimes they support the ordinary criminals who cannot afford these kind of sanitary materials in the prisons. But it is not a way of solving the problem. The government is responsible for these prisoners, because depriving people from their liberty doesn't mean that you just leave them to die in the prisons. You have to take care of these prisoners. You have to provide healthcare. You have to provide the sanitary materials and a proper feeding for these people. So this is unfortunately the missing part of the prisons. And regarding the torture, you have asked about the torture methods. Of course, we just have allegations of beatings in the prisons in some cases, and also forcing people to stand up for a long time while they count the prisoners, the inmates in the cells, and also searching the cells and searching the prisoners. The body searches are sometimes immense and amount to torture because of the strict searching methods. And of course, people might consider that it is a proper way of searching because these people might hide some weapons or drugs, so they have to strip search the prisoners. But this is not for the ordinary criminals, unfortunately, mostly for the political prisoners. And what if you strip search a political prisoner? What can you consider? Would they hide weapons? Would they hide drugs? These are political people, intellectuals of the country, the journalists, the politicians, the lawyers. These people would not have anything to do with the drugs or the weapons. So strip searching amounts to torture in these kind of cases. And also, if it is an ordinary criminal, you have to regard the dignity of the prisoner while you strip search these people. And with the new decree, of course, they might force the physicians or the health professionals to search for the body cavities. And this is not ethical for health professionals, because you cannot force people if they refuse these kind of searches for the body cavities. So what if they refuse? Then either they will have some investigations against themselves, the health professionals, or some other professionals will do this body searches, which might just harm the person's health in this sense.
What is it like in women's prisons, I mean, considering that women have different needs?
Yeah, of course they have other needs, and also there are many children inside the prisons.
Yes.
Now with the new amendment, they say that women with children with ages from 0 to 6 will be released. However, since the Prisoners of Terrorist Act, the prisoners who are so-called terrorists will not just benefit from this release,
right.
Which means that the children will continue to be in the prisons. So it is a serious problem regarding the children's health, and also for the women as well. And women need some sanitary materials for their periods, for example, but many of these prisoners, particularly the ordinary criminals, cannot afford these sanitary materials. And the government does not provide such kind of materials for these women. So they have special needs, but they don't have any means to obtain them. This is a serious problem. Yeah, these are the main problems I think that I can just
right.
share with you.
Yeah, because I'm just wondering if like the prisons overall have been taking any precautionary steps to handle the virus itself, other than to release prisoners.
Actually, this should be the main step in the beginning. Since you do not prevent the infection, then this is a huge mishap for the prisons or anywhere in the country. So prevention is essential for these people. Then we have to be cautious and have precautions for people who work in the prisons, and we should have guidelines how they enter the prisons when they come from their houses, how they come from their houses, for example. They should not use the public transport systems, so there should be a special transportation system for these people, and they have to be followed up, and regular health checks should be done for these people, for wardens or the health professionals or administrative personnel. And also when they enter the prison, then they have to change, and they have to clean themselves and have some special clothes for the prison, and they have to use masks for these people, since they can just bring in, and we don't know whether it is the window period of the infection. So they have to use face masks, and they have to be cautious about the cleaning. There should be guidelines for this purpose. Just recently, before we started the interview, I received a guideline from Antalya Bar Association's Human Rights Committee. So they have prepared a guideline for this, but I didn't have time to review it. Maybe I can send you and you can review and afterwards have another broadcast for this purpose.
Thank you. That would be great. Yeah.
It is very important and a very good step for the Antalya Bar Association. I know that they are very active, the Human Rights Committee. So they should have these kind of prevention methods for the prisons, not to spread the infection in the prison. And also should have follow-ups for the prisoners throughout this pandemics, and the cleaning system should be very important. For example, the prisoners wash their clothes. It is hand washed in the prison cells, and it is dried in the prison cells again. So it is not a healthy system. They should have some washing machines for these clothes, and they should be cleaned in a preventive way for these prisoners. But we don't have this in the prisons, unfortunately.
And I'm guessing they, even in Turkish prisons, they keep their shoes on most of the time.
Yes, of course they keep. They have slippers in the cells, but of course cleaning the cells is done by the prisoners themselves. Train for preventive methods also, how they can prevent the infection to be spread, and how they have to clean their cells themselves and the clothes, and maybe not to use their shoes. Of course, for the people who work the staff, they shouldn't use their own everyday shoes in the prisons. They should use some protective shoes in the prisons.
Okay. You were cut off at the part where you were saying who is responsible for cleaning the cells. Did you say the prisoners were responsible for cleaning their own cells? Okay.
Clean their own cells.
Okay, great. And I wanted to talk about the LGBTQ community in the prisons, whether there's any whether there's an extra stigma surrounding queer lifestyles in prison during the pandemic that you might know of, if they're facing extra discrimination.
Yeah. Unfortunately, discrimination is always there with the LGBTQ plus community. And also the administration doesn't know how to handle these kind of cases. For example, a trans female cannot stay with the women's prisons, but they have to stay with the males' prisons. So it's a problem, of course. And a trans male person have to stay with the women.
Right.
So they are unhappy in the beginning, regardless of other problems. I remember, for example, when I was arrested and put into jail in 2016, there was a trans male in our prison, a women's prison, and he was so unhappy and refused to do anything with the wardens, with the prisoners, and this is a problem, of course, and discrimination for this man to be together with women all the time while he refuses to be a woman. So we have such kind of discriminatory problems. They can't, for example, sometimes reach for their hormone medications. They can't reach to the healthcare institutes, particularly now with the corona pandemics. The healthcare institutes are also dangerous. So organizing the healthcare institutes is another problem all over the country, because we should have some clean hospitals where people who need other kinds of healthcare and they can safely go and have their treatments or their diagnostic tests in those kind of clean hospitals. We never know which hospital is the pandemic hospital, which hospital is the clean hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And when it is the prisoners, then they would be so experiencing difficulties with these kind of referral systems.
Mm-hmm. One last question, just moving outside of prisons. Can you tell us about a little bit about the environment in the streets post-corona? How worried are people, and are they protected? And what further measures can be taken?
There is no serious measures taken for people who work in the country. Because they have to go to work.
Yeah.
If they don't go to work, they will lose their jobs.
Yeah.
And then they have to use the public transport, of course, public transportation for going work. Some of the companies had some precautions, and instead of public transportation, they had some special private transportation systems.
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow, they have to be together, crowded in the companies during their jobs. So this is not a way of prevention, of course. And we know that some people had to work, of course. For example, health professionals. You can't just escape from working in the hospitals. You have to work. Then you have to diminish the number of the people who are on the streets. You can just shut down all the workplaces where there is no imminent need for these kind of work. Maybe only cleaners of the streets for the cleaning system and for sanitary purposes. Maybe markets with limited numbers for people to have their needs, and limited number of people working there with enough physical distance in between. But otherwise, you have to, of course, as a government, provide these people some financial support. For example, they need to pay their electricity, they need to pay their water, they need to pay their rents. So then you can have a financial support system for this. And many of these people are not workers with a support system and social security. Many of them have no security systems at all. They are not included in security systems. So the government also have to provide these kind of social security measures for all people, and the unions have to demand from the government for these social security systems for people to stay in home. Otherwise they can't. It is impossible for them. They would die.
Yes, yeah, I was actually just going to ask you if you think that forcing people to come to work during this time, is it a violation of human rights?
Exactly. It is a violation of human rights. It's a violation of life, actually, life right. because then you just make them face with the COVID-19 virus infection. If you make them helpless and go out to the streets to work.
Yeah. Okay, I think I've covered everything. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the interview. Sorry for my English, of course.
No, it's
I can't remember the words, but I just tried my best.
No, it was perfect, really. Thank you.
If it is understandable, okay then.
Okay. All right. Have a great day. Keep safe.
Keep safe also.
All right.
Hope you have a fine world in the future.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.